My husband vanished for years, and I believed he was dead. But years later, he returned with a new son and a disturbing story inside. Okay, gather round because I need to tell you something. What if the man you build a life with, the father of your child, didn't just vanish but actively chose to walk away and start a whole other life? And then, 2 years later, he had the audacity to show up on your doorstep with a baby in his arms, expecting forgiveness. I'll never forget that day. I was coming home from work, just thinking about what to make for dinner. My daughter was in the back seat, whining about homework. The radio was low, just another Tuesday. But turning onto our street, something felt off. His car wasn't in the driveway. He usually beat us home, liked being inside first. That night, the porch light was on, but the driveway was empty. Inside, the house felt wrong. Not scary, just too quiet. No music. No pan on the stove. No sound of him talking to our daughter. She tossed her shoes and ran to the couch like it was any other night, oblivious. I stood there, her backpack still on my shoulder, desperately trying to believe there was a simple explanation. Delayed at work. Stopped somewhere. Phone dead. Fine. I put my stuff down, checked my phone. Nothing. No text, no missed call. I called him once. Straight to voicemail. My chest did that tight thing, the one I always call overreacting. He's probably on his way, I told my daughter, trying to make my voice sound normal. I stepped back onto the porch and called his name, just like I always did when he was running late. No answer. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the smell of the cereal bowl he'd left in the sink that morning. My daughter came running, hair wild, clutching her stuffed animal. She slid on the floor, laughed, then frowned when she looked past me. "Where's Dad?" she asked. That cold feeling started in my chest. The one that tells you something is deeply wrong, even if your brain is still writing excuses. I texted him, called again, voicemail. I plugged in my own phone, like that would magically bring his back to life, and started dinner like a robot. Stirring, seasoning, checking the clock, over and over. By the time it was fully dark and our daughter was in her pajamas, I was pacing from the kitchen to the front window, pretending I was just checking the weather. I called his job. The woman sounded tired. She said he hadn't clocked in at all. That's when my stomach truly dropped. "There must be a mistake," I said, but she repeated it. No show. No call. Nothing. I called my mother, my voice shaking in that embarrassing way I hate. She did that thing where she tries to sound calm, but I could hear her grabbing keys, telling my father to get his jacket. They were coming. Then my in-laws. My mother-in-law went quiet, then said they were on their way too. By the time everyone arrived, our living room looked like some weird vigil without the candles. My parents on one side, his on the other, my daughter curled between them, watching their faces, trying to figure out just how scared she should be. We called the police. They told us to wait until morning. Apparently, a grown man can just disappear for a bit, and it's not an emergency. I get it. Adults have the right to walk away. But I didn't sleep. I lay in our bed, staring at the empty space beside me, listening for a car that never pulled in, a key that never turned. Every siren wail made my heart jump. The next morning, my parents drove me to the station. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Filing a missing person report feels like something other people do. People on the news. Not a regular woman who still had to pack a lunch for her kid. The officer asked routine questions in a bored voice. When did I last see him? Did we fight? Substances? Talk about leaving? I answered, feeling like a suspect instead of a wife who hadn't slept. They checked the basic stuff: hospitals, accidents, jail. Nothing. It was like he'd stepped off the face of the earth. The days after that blurred into an awful mix of normal and not normal. I still had to dress my daughter, make dinner, pay bills. But now there were also calls from detectives, worried coworkers, and that constant knot in my stomach. My parents started staying on the couch, so I wouldn't be alone. My in-laws came with casseroles and anxious eyes, sitting at the table like they were waiting for a knock that would make everything make sense. It never came. What did come were questions. Friends, neighbors, people from our community. Every time they saw me, I learned how to say, "No, nothing yet," with a tight little smile that made my cheeks ache. At night, after my daughter slept, I'd scroll social media, reading articles about missing spouses, making myself sick with worst-case scenarios. I called his phone so many times, his voicemail greeting felt like a ghost. I printed flyers. I never thought I'd be that person, standing at a copy machine, feeding it page after page of my husband's face. I handed them out at gas stations, taped them to light poles, my fingers numb in the cold. My parents came with me. My in-laws, too. My mother-in-law cried in the passenger seat, clutching a stack of flyers like a lifeline. Weeks passed. The police did what they could, which wasn't much when there's no car in a ditch, no drained bank account. They told me, sometimes adults just leave. They'd say it quietly, looking at me with pity. Maybe I should have listened more closely. Then, one afternoon, a few weeks in, the call came. A police officer asking me to identify a body at the morgue. There's no way to describe that moment without sounding dramatic, but my legs just gave out. My mother grabbed the phone before it hit the floor. My father kept calling my name, trying to pull me back into the room. My in-laws showed up minutes later, like they'd been waiting outside. I don't remember the drive. I remember the fluorescent lights, the cold, the sound of doors, my mother-in-law's hand crushing mine, the sheet, the smell. My mind tried to split in half, one part screaming this isn't real, the other focusing on stupid details like scuff marks on the floor. It wasn't him. I almost threw up from the shock of relief, which then slammed into a wall of guilt. Some other family was getting bad news that day. We walked out with our legs still working, but I wanted to collapse anyway. On the drive home, my mother kept saying it was a sign that he must still be alive. I nodded because I had no words left. You'd think that would be the turning point where hope kicked in again. It wasn't. After that, something shifted in how people looked at me. Practical questions started. Debt, insurance. Was he stressed? People whispered. I caught phrases like midlife crisis and another family somewhere. You never really know a person. I started replaying every conversation, every sigh, every late night he said he needed time alone. It felt like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing and the picture on the box blurred. The world doesn't stop just because your life has exploded. My job gave me some time off, but then the calls started. Polite but firm. They understood, but they needed to know when I'd be back. Bills didn't care that my husband was missing. Mortgage didn't care. My daughter still needed shoes. So I went back. Walking into that office was surreal. People looked at me like I was a walking news story. Some hugged me. Some avoided eye contact like grief was contagious. Someone had cleared his picture off my desk without asking, probably thinking they were doing me a favor. I went to the bathroom and cried so hard I stuffed paper towels into my mouth to keep quiet. Then I did my job, answered phones, filed paperwork, smiled at clients who had no idea that when I said have a nice day, my brain was screaming, my husband is gone. After work, I picked up my daughter, helped with homework, made dinner. Then I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the empty spot where his breathing used to be. At some point, surviving means making decisions you never thought you'd have to make. The house, once warm, felt like a museum of a life that didn't exist anymore. Every corner held a memory and not the good kind. My daughter started asking why we still lived in Dad's house when he wasn't there. Our savings weren't endless. The mortgage weighed on me like a concrete block. I talked with my parents, my in-laws. Even the detective said that, realistically, after a certain amount of time with no activity, no evidence, you had to start planning for a future where he just wasn't coming back. That sentence shattered something in me and set something else free at the same time. I sold the house. People had opinions, of course. Some thought it was practical, some heartless. A few actually said to my face that it looked like I was moving on pretty fast, as if listing a house was the same as forgetting your husband existed. I stopped going to certain community events. My parents helped me pack. My father took down the pictures, carefully stacking them. My mother wrapped mugs. My in-laws cried the day we walked through the empty rooms. My mother-in-law ran her hand along the doorway where we'd marked my daughter's height. I promised we'd never paint over those marks, which was a lie. Obviously, the new owners did. My daughter clung to my leg. She was braver than I was. Kids are weirdly resilient until they're not. We moved into a smaller rental across town. Thin walls, noisy neighbors, a view of the parking lot instead of the backyard where my daughter learned to ride her bike. It was cramped. Nothing matched. But it was also something I could afford on my salary alone, which meant I could breathe a tiny bit easier at night. My parents came with folding chairs. My mother-in-law brought curtains. My father-in-law fixed a loose cabinet door because he needed to fix something. Time did that thing it does, stretching and collapsing at the same time. A whole year passed. Sometimes it felt like I was still standing in that doorway, keys in hand, waiting for a car that never pulled in. Other times, it felt like my old life had happened to someone else entirely. My daughter started a new school, made new friends, stopped asking every single day when her father was coming back. She still had moments, though. Nights where she'd crawl into my bed, whispering that she dreamed he was knocking on the door. I'd hold her and remind her we were safe, even though I didn't know what that meant anymore. Around the 1-year mark, my in-laws showed up at our new place without warning. I was in leggings with a stain and a t-shirt I'd slept in. They were dressed nicer than usual. My mother-in-law in a blouse she saved for special occasions, my father-in-law in an actual button-down shirt. They sat at my tiny kitchen table, hands wrapped around cheap coffee mugs like they needed something to hold on to. My mother-in-law started crying almost immediately. My father-in-law cleared his throat. Finally, he said they'd sold some of their property, a small rental house, some land his own father had left him. They didn't need it. They were getting older, time to simplify. They wanted to give the money to their granddaughter. I just stared at them. They explained it felt wrong to keep it sitting there while their son had walked away from his responsibilities. They couldn't make him come back, but they could at least try to make sure our daughter had some kind of security. The plan was to put most of it into a fund for her future and use the rest as a down payment so we could eventually stop renting. I argued. Of course I did. I told them it was too much. I told them people would talk. They said people were already talking, and at least this way, something good was happening. They reminded me it was their money, their choice, and if their son ever got his act together, he could be mad at them in person. Word got out anyway. News like that always does in a town like ours. Suddenly, there were little posts on social media about certain people taking advantage of the elderly. Vague wording, but very clear aim. I saw one comment thread where someone literally said I had waited just long enough to cash in. I sat on my couch, shaking, phone in hand, trying not to throw it at the wall. My in-laws defended me when they could, but I still had to live with those stares in the grocery store. I still had to stand in line at the bank behind someone who had shared that post. I still had to answer my own relatives when they called and asked if I was sure it was ethical to take that money. Ethical. Like I'd orchestrated my own abandonment for a payout. We did use some of it for a down payment eventually. Not right away. It took me months to even look at listings. When we finally moved into the little house on a quieter street, my daughter ran from room to room like it was a palace. We set up her bed first. We painted the walls together. I opened a separate account for the rest of the money, labeled with her name. Every time I transferred a little bit more of my paycheck into that account, it felt like I was building a fortress, brick by brick, around her future. She still asked about her father sometimes. The older she got, the more pointed the questions became. Why he left? If he was dead? If I was sure? If there was something she did? That one hurt the most. I told her the truth I could live with, that he had made choices that had nothing to do with her worth, that he was the one missing out, that we were going to be okay anyway. For a while, that was our life. Me working, my parents helping, my in-laws coming over on weekends to take my daughter to the park. We created this strange, patched-together family that somehow worked, even with the giant hole in the middle where my husband used to stand. Then, almost exactly 2 years after he disappeared, someone banged on my front door early one school morning and ripped that fragile normal to shreds. I was in the kitchen making breakfast. My daughter was at the table, drawing hearts on her worksheet. The knock was too loud for that hour, that heavy pounding that makes your stomach drop before you even know why. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked down the hallway, already rehearsing a speech for some sales pitch I was going to shut down. I opened the door and there he was. I don't know how long I just stood there, staring. Time did that thing where it stretches and snaps at the same time. He looked different and exactly the same. Thinner, maybe. Dark circles under his eyes. Same jaw. Same way he always pushed his hair back when he was nervous. He was standing on my porch like he'd just stepped out to get the mail. And next to him, tucked into a stroller, was a baby. My brain refused to connect the dots. At first, I stepped forward. I heard myself say his name. My whole body flooded with something that felt like relief and fury, fighting for space. I threw my arms around him before I could stop myself, sobbing into his jacket, asking a million questions at once. Where had he been? What happened? Was he okay? Why hadn't he called? Why hadn't he called? He kept saying my name, his hands awkward on my back. There was this weird delay in his voice, like he was answering from far away. I didn't even look at the stroller for the first few seconds. When I finally pulled back enough to see the baby's face, my brain caught up. The baby was too big to be a newborn, old enough to look right at me and grab at the zipper on my hoodie. Dark hair, little round cheeks, a blanket tucked around tiny legs. The baby looked up at me like I was just some stranger who had interrupted a walk. Something in me went ice cold. Behind me, I heard my daughter's footsteps thump down the hallway. She peeked around my arm and froze. Her whole body went stiff. Her mouth fell open. She whispered, "Dad," in this tiny voice that cracked right down the middle. He looked over my shoulder and smiled, but it was this weak, guilty thing that made me want to slam the door shut right then. I didn't slam it. Not yet. I stepped back, pulled my daughter behind me like a shield. I asked him again where he'd been. He said he wanted to explain, that he needed to come inside, that it was a long story. I looked at the stroller again, and suddenly the long story didn't feel that complicated. My chest started to burn. All the missing nights, the whispers, the half-thought-out theories people had thrown around. They all crashed into one ugly picture. I told him he could talk from the porch. He begged. He tried that soft voice he used to calm me down, saying we shouldn't do this in front of our daughter. I could feel my daughter shaking behind me. I told him if he didn't start talking right there, I was closing the door and calling the police, just to have them on record that he was alive. So he talked. He said there had been someone else, a woman from work. It started as just talking during late shifts and turned into something else. It had been going on longer than he wanted to admit. When she got pregnant, everything spun out of control. He couldn't face me, he said. He couldn't face our daughter, my parents, his parents. He said he'd packed a bag and driven off with this plan to figure it out somewhere else. And it had all just kept going from there. I don't know if there's a right way to find out your husband didn't just vanish. He chose to walk away and start a whole second life with someone else. But I'm pretty sure on your front porch, in front of your kid, while a baby stares at you, is pretty high on the list of worst options. He talked about moving to another state with the woman, about living with some relatives of hers, about trying to make it work. He said she changed her mind after the baby came, that she had wanted an escape from her own mess, not a real family, that raising a child with a man who had already abandoned one family turned out to be less romantic than she thought. He said she left, just up and left one day. No forwarding address, no goodbye. She left a letter and a baby, and that was it. He said he'd driven back because he had nowhere else to go. He said it like he was telling me about car trouble. Like this was all just some unfortunate series of events that had happened to him. Instead of a long chain of choices he had made on purpose, he kept trying to slide in phrases like, "I wasn't in my right mind, and I was so depressed, and I didn't want to hurt you." I could see the story he'd built in his head, the one where he was some tragic figure pulled in too deep by circumstances. I snapped. All that numb ice inside me cracked open, and something molten came pouring out. I don't even remember exactly what I said first. I know there was a lot of, "How dare you?" and "You left your daughter," and "You let me think you were dead." There was also a lot of swearing. My daughter started crying again, louder this time, hands over her ears. The baby in the stroller started wailing too, because of course he did. I told him he needed to leave. Right then. I told him he had made his choice when he drove away from this house the first time, without so much as a note. I told him I didn't care about his long story. I didn't care about his excuses. I didn't care that his second life had blown up in his face. I told him I didn't want him or his lies or his baby anywhere near the life I had scraped back together from the mess he left. He tried to pull the "but the baby is innocent" card. Of course he did. He said I was punishing a child for the sins of the parents. He tried to guilt-trip me with my own faith, asking what kind of compassionate person would turn away a helpless baby. He looked at our daughter like she might help his case. She flinched. That was it for me. I told him if he didn't leave my porch in that exact moment, I would call the police and tell them that the missing person they'd been looking for had just shown up. And by the way, here was the man who had abandoned his child for years and then tried to drop another baby on his ex-wife's doorstep. I told him I would file for any legal thing I could find with his name on it. I told him I was done being the soft place he landed when he blew up his own life. He stood there for a second, looking at me like he didn't recognize the person in front of him. Then he grabbed the stroller handle, muttered something I didn't catch, and backed down the steps. I closed the door. My daughter collapsed against me, sobbing. I slid down the wall with her, heart pounding so hard I thought I might faint. I could hear him out there for a while, pacing, then walking away, then a car door slamming. Eventually, the sound faded. I sat on the floor with my daughter in my lap, both of us shaking, and tried to figure out how to explain any of this to a child who still slept with the nightlight on. After I got her calmed down and settled in her room with a movie I called my in-laws, telling them their son was alive and had just shown up at my door with a baby was one of the strangest conversations I've ever had. My mother-in-law made this sound I'd never heard from a human throat before, something between a sob and a scream. My father-in-law went very quiet. They said they were coming over. I told them not to. I told them they needed to stay home in case he went there next. They agreed, reluctantly. Before we hung up, my father-in-law said, in this voice I'd never heard before, "Thank you for calling us, even after everything." Of course, he went there. A few hours later, my phone buzzed nonstop. My in-laws told me he had shown up at their house with the same story, the same baby, the same sad eyes. He tried to paint himself as a man who had been through unspeakable things, who had lost himself and was now ready to be forgiven. They had listened. Then my father-in-law, who used to apologize for raising his voice even a little, told him to sit down because they needed to talk about the money. I wasn't there, obviously, but I know my in-laws. I can picture it. The quiet kitchen, the old clock ticking on the wall, the stack of bills in a little basket on the counter. I can see my mother-in-law wringing her hands, and my father-in-law finally saying the words their son never expected to hear. They told him about the property, about selling the rental house and the land, about giving the money to their granddaughter because they thought their son was either dead or gone for good. They told him it was done. No takebacks. No secret account with his name on it. He lost it. According to my father-in-law, he went from sad and sorry to furious in about 3 seconds. He accused them of betrayal. He said I had manipulated them. He used words like brainwashed and gold digger and my inheritance. He banged his fist on their table so hard a mug fell over. The baby started crying again. My mother-in-law had to pick him up and walk around the kitchen while her grown son yelled at her for giving away money that he had, in his mind, already spent. My father-in-law, who had always been the peacemaker, stood up and told him to get out. He told him that inheritance wasn't a guarantee, that if he wanted to talk about people being taken advantage of, maybe he should go look at the little girl he had abandoned, and the baby he was dragging from house to house like luggage. He told him he loved him, but he wouldn't reward this kind of behavior. He said the money had gone to the only person in this whole mess who had done nothing wrong, their granddaughter. That was the first clash. It wasn't the last. When he realized he wasn't getting a check from his parents, he shifted tactics. He went online. You have no idea how fast a half-truth can turn into a full-blown story when people want drama. It started with a picture, some old shot of him and his parents in front of a house, with a caption about family homes and promises. Then there was a long paragraph about how his soon-to-be ex had convinced his elderly parents to sign everything over to her daughter, leaving him with nothing. He never mentioned the part where he conveniently forgot to show up for his own life for years. The post took off in our small corner of the internet. People love to feel like they're standing up for the underdog, especially when that underdog is a man spinning a story about a cold ex and heartless system. Comments poured in. People shared it with outraged emojis. There were entire threads about modern wives and money-hungry women and men not being protected. I watched it happen on my cracked phone screen, my own face nowhere in the pictures, and yet somehow plastered over every word. Strangers called me every name you can imagine without ever having met me. People who knew us a little, but not enough, chimed in. A woman I used to sit behind at community gatherings shared the post with a caption about, "This is why marriage is scary for men now." I saw it all. I sat on my couch with my daughter playing on the floor nearby and scrolled until my thumb hurt, feeling like I was watching my life get rewritten in real time by the man who had detonated it in the first place. The offline fallout was just as ugly. I had people corner me in the grocery store parking lot asking if it was true that I had forced his parents to give me their house. Someone actually said, "Must be nice to get rich off someone else's hard work," while I stood there holding a carton of eggs and a bag of apples. I wanted to scream that I was still clipping coupons and checking my bank balance before filling my tank, but I knew it wouldn't matter. He didn't stop at words. He started showing up at my daughter's school, hanging back near the parking lot at dismissal time, just close enough for her to see him, far enough that it was hard to make a scene. She would freeze when she spotted him, then bolt to my car and slam the door. The first time it happened, she shook for an hour. I marched into the school the next day and told them everything. They were supportive, but there are limits to what they can do without a court paper in hand. So I got the court paper. Filing for a restraining order isn't glamorous. There's no dramatic music, no inspiring speeches. It's just forms and waiting rooms and explaining your pain to people who have heard far worse. I told them about the abandonment, the sudden return, the baby on my porch, the online campaign, the appearances at school. I felt like I was reading from a script I didn't remember agreeing to act out. Eventually, a tired-looking judge signed a piece of paper that basically said he needed to stay away from me and from our daughter's school. It was something, at least on paper. My in-laws tried to reason with him. They asked him to stop posting, to stop showing up, to think about the damage he was doing, not just to me but to his own child. He listened just long enough to twist their words. When people pointed out that his parents were defending me online, he started hinting that they were senile, that I had filled their heads with lies, that they were not what they used to be. I watched him cannibalize his own support system in real time. And then, because apparently the bar for his behavior hadn't been lowered enough yet, he pulled his most predictable move. He disappeared again. This time, though, he didn't vanish alone. He left the baby behind. It happened on a random morning at my in-laws' house. They had caved and let him stay for a little while after he showed up with more apologies and promises. I get it. They're parents. Hope is stubborn. They set rules. He would look for work. He would help with the baby. He wouldn't drink. He wouldn't bring drama into their home. For a couple of weeks, it actually looked like he might follow through. He did a few odd jobs. He took the baby on walks. He even went to a community meeting with them, like old times. Then one morning, my mother-in-law woke up to the sound of the baby crying and realized the house felt wrong. Too quiet. She went to the guest room. The bed was empty. His bag was gone. The closet was open. The baby was in the crib alone, diaper full, face red from crying. On the kitchen table, there was a scrap of paper with a few sentences scribbled in his rushed handwriting. Something about needing space, and you love him more than I ever could. And you already picked your side with the money. He had walked out again, left his son behind like a bag of trash. My mother-in-law called me, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. My father-in-law got on the phone and said they didn't know what to do, that they couldn't handle a baby that young full-time, that they were too old, too tired, too broken by all of this. I drove over there immediately, my daughter in the back seat with wide eyes, clutching her stuffed toy like it could ward off the reality of what we were walking into. Seeing that baby in their living room was surreal. He was sitting on a blanket surrounded by toys, cheeks sticky from tears, his little hands grabbing at anything within reach. He had no idea his father had left again. No idea how many bridges had been burned over his short life already. I picked him up, and he settled against me like he'd known me for years instead of moments. My heart twisted. I didn't want another child. I didn't want anything that tied me any closer to the man who had done this. But I am not made of stone. My in-laws started reaching out for help. They talked to social services, to a woman at their community center who knew someone in another state where the baby's mother had supposedly gone. They posted in private groups online with pictures, asking if anyone recognized the woman. They got ignored, then yelled at for airing dirty laundry. Then finally, slowly, responses from people who actually wanted help. After a few months of this, one of those messages turned into a real lead. A woman who worked in a retail store in a different town saw the picture and thought the baby looked like a child she had seen in an old photo on a coworker's phone. Same dark hair, same eyes. That coworker was the woman my husband had left me for, the baby's mother. Turns out she had been living under the radar in this small town, working, paying rent, trying to pretend the entire disaster she had helped create had never happened. When my in-laws' contact finally reached her, she denied it at first, said it wasn't her, said she didn't know any man by that name. Then, faced with more pictures and the threat of formal reports, she broke down and admitted the truth. She told them she had been overwhelmed, that she had panicked, that she had never actually wanted a baby. She had wanted a man to rescue her from her old life, and then realized she had just traded one mess for another. She said she thought my husband would be a good father because he talked so much about the daughter he had left behind honestly. The most twisted sentence I have ever heard. At first, she still didn't want to take the baby back. She said she didn't have the money, the space, the emotional capacity. My in-laws and later a social worker laid it out very clearly. The baby could not stay with two senior citizens who were already stretched thin. Either she stepped up and took responsibility, or things were going to escalate into legal territory she couldn't control. Under that pressure, she agreed to come. When she walked into my in-laws' living room for the first time, it was like watching a ghost in a mirror. She was younger than me, but stress had carved lines into her face. She looked at the baby like he was both hers and a stranger's. He reached for her after a hesitant moment, and something in her softened. I was there, off to the side, holding a mug of coffee with both hands because otherwise they would have been shaking. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't really want her to. She apologized eventually, mostly to my in-laws, for leaving them with the baby, for the chaos. She didn't say much to me, just a quiet, "I'm sorry," that covered absolutely nothing and everything at the same time. I nodded because what else was there to do? None of us could undo any of it. We could only move pieces around and try to make sure this baby didn't become another casualty of my husband's selfishness. She took the baby with her when she left. There was a lot of paperwork, some court dates, a whole tangle of logistics I honestly wasn't involved in beyond giving permission for my name to be used as someone with information about his father's pattern. I went back to my life, back to work, back to school pickups, back to making dinner while my daughter told me about her day. Online, the noise started to quiet down. People moved on to the next scandal. A few of them sent me private messages saying they were sorry they'd believed him. Those apologies landed like pebbles in a deep well. I said thank you because that's what you do, but it didn't erase the damage. Social services called me a few times after that, asking more questions about my husband's behavior, his history, the way he handled money, the way he had left. Apparently, the baby's mother had decided she wanted to pursue child support. I didn't blame her. She had made terrible choices, yes, but she was trying now. Meanwhile, somewhere out there, my husband was probably spinning another story about being the victim of cruel women and an unfair system. Months passed. Honestly, at that point, I kind of forgot he was a person who needed to eat and work and pay rent. In my mind, he was just this floating problem, like a storm cloud always on the horizon. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang, and I found out that he had finally discovered what happens when you try to outrun paperwork in a country that loves paperwork more than anything. Apparently, in order to pay for his new disappearing act, he'd gotten a job under his real name again. Some boring office position, from what I heard through the grapevine. The thing about getting a job under your real name when there are active cases with your social security number attached is that the system notices. The child support case for the baby pinged his employment. A notice went out. Court dates were set. He didn't show up to any of them, because of course he didn't. Eventually, a judge got tired of the no-shows and issued a warrant. He got pulled over for something stupid. A rolling stop, a broken taillight. Whatever it was, the officer ran his information, saw the warrant, and that was that. I found out because my in-laws called me, voices shaking. They had been notified as emergency contacts. Hearing that your husband is in custody because he couldn't be bothered to show up to court to talk about supporting the children he abandoned is one of those moments where the universe stops pretending it's subtle. My feelings were a mess. On one hand, there was this ugly, petty satisfaction, like the universe had finally pulled the emergency brake on a train that had been barreling through all of us. On the other hand, there was dread. I knew my daughter was going to hear about it. I knew it would rip open wounds that were barely scabbed over. Sure enough, the news trickled down the kid grapevine. Someone's parent mentioned something, within earshot of someone else. And within days, my daughter came home from school, with her shoulders hunched and her eyes too big. "Is Dad in jail?" she asked, standing in the kitchen doorway, clutching her backpack like a shield. I closed my eyes for a second. Then I told her the truth, in kid terms. That he hadn't followed rules about taking care of his responsibilities. That a judge had said there were consequences. That he was somewhere safe, not hurt, but not free to just come and go as he pleased anymore. She listened, chewing on her lip. That night, she had nightmares and wet the bed for the first time in a long time. I washed the sheets in the middle of the night while she slept on the couch, cartoons playing softly to cover the sound of my quiet crying. He was released eventually, of course. The system isn't built to keep men like him locked up for long. He made some kind of deal. He agreed to a structured payment plan for child support. Not just for the baby, but for our daughter, too. Once the case was expanded, I know this because I was suddenly on the radar in a whole new way. Up until that point, I hadn't formally filed for anything. I had just been surviving, paying bills, raising our child, telling myself that I didn't need his money. I had a lot of pride mixed in there, if I'm honest. I didn't want to be the ex who dragged him to court, even if he deserved every legal headache. Watching him face consequences with the other child shook something loose in me. A woman from a legal aid office sat across from me one day at a plain table and laid it out. I had the right to file for back support, for future support, for something, anything, that acknowledged on paper that he had a financial responsibility to the human he had helped bring into the world and then walked away from. She told me it wouldn't undo the years I had struggled, but it could make things a little less tight. She also said something that stuck with me. This is not about revenge. It is about accountability. I thought about my daughter's college fund, about how hard I had worked to build it, about the way my in-laws had given up their property so she wouldn't be punished for her father's choices, about how he had screamed at them about that money like it had always been his by divine right. I thought about every night I had lain awake doing mental math with the numbers in my bank account, trying to figure out what bill could be paid a little late without shutting off a service. So I filed. The process was as exhausting and humiliating as you would expect. I had to pull together pay stubs, bank statements, proof of expenses, proof of his absence. I had to explain over and over that no, he hadn't sent money. Not even once. Not even a small amount. Not even for birthdays or holidays. I had to sit in a waiting room with other women in similar situations. All of us staring at our phones and pretending we weren't listening to each other's names being called. When it was finally our turn, in front of the judge, he tried to play the same song. He talked about mental health, about being overwhelmed, about not being able to find steady work, about how the situation with the other child had already strapped him financially. He hinted that I was comfortable now with the house and the help from his parents, as if that canceled out his obligation. The judge thankfully didn't seem impressed. He pointed out the years of absence, the record of his online behavior, the trail of no-shows to previous hearings. He looked at my stack of documents, then at my husband, and said something like, "This is not about punishing you for being a flawed human. This is about enforcing your responsibilities as a parent." Then he put numbers on paper. Not huge numbers. The system never really makes them huge. But enough to say officially that my husband owed something to our daughter, and to the baby he had left behind twice. The first payment showed up a few weeks later. It was smaller than it should have been, because they took a portion for back support owed to the other child. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the deposit notice on my phone. My stomach twisted. Part of me wanted to reject it, to send it back, to prove that I didn't need his money. Another part of me saw my daughter's name attached to that account and thought about the future apartments she might rent, the textbooks she might buy, the airports she might walk through someday, chasing a life that was not built on fear. I left the money where it was. The payments have never been consistent. Some months they're on time. Some months they're late. A few months they don't show up at all, and then double up later. Every time I see one, I remember that somewhere out there he's clocking in and out of some job, probably complaining to coworkers about his crazy ex and unfair courts, while the system quietly siphons off a piece of his check and slides it into an account with our daughter's name on it. I don't forgive him. I know people love stories where the woman finds peace and lets go and maybe even thanks the mess for making her stronger. But that's not what this is. I moved forward. That's different. I built a life for my daughter and me out of the wreckage he left. I leaned on my parents and my in-laws and friends who saw through his online performance and stuck by me anyway. I went to work even when my eyes were swollen from crying. I painted walls and hung curtains and fixed leaky faucets and figured out how to fill out forms that used to have his name on them. My daughter is older now. She knows more than I wish she did. Kids always do. She remembers the night I opened the door and found him standing there with that stroller. She remembers the way my body went rigid, the way my voice changed. She knows he has another child out there somewhere. She knows he went away again. She knows that money shows up, sometimes that has his name on it in tiny letters on a statement. She also knows that her grandfather has never missed a school concert, that her grandmother always answers the phone on the first ring, that my father taught her how to ride a bike in the parking lot of our first tiny rental. She asked me once if I regretted anything. Not in those words exactly. She said, "If you could go back and not marry Dad, would you?" I told her the truth, that I regret the way I shrank myself for him, the way I ignored my own instincts, the way I let him talk over my fear and my doubt and my anger until I couldn't hear myself. I said I would change that if I could, but I would not change her. She is the one thing that came out of all of this that is pure and good. If I had to walk through hell to get her, then fine. I would still want her on the other side. Sometimes when the house is quiet and my brain tries to drag me back into old memories, I still get flashes. The sound of that first voicemail that never came. The fluorescent lights in the morgue. The weight of the flyers in my hand. The look on my in-laws' faces when they told me about the money. The feel of my daughter's small fingers digging into my arm when she saw her father on our porch again for the last time. I also get other flashes now. My daughter laughing with my father over some silly inside joke. My mother teaching her how to make a recipe that has been passed down through generations. My in-laws sitting on my couch at my new house, watching her open presents, their eyes bright and soft at the same time. Little scenes of a life that is not the one I planned, but is still a life, still ours. If there is a lesson in all of this, it is not some neat thing you can fit on a picture with a sunset behind it. It is messy and uncomfortable. It is this. Sometimes the person who blows up your life never gets better. They don't have a redemption arc. They don't come back with flowers and a sincere apology and a new job and a therapist and a promise to make it right. Sometimes they just keep being exactly who they are. And the only thing you can do is stop standing where the debris will land. I stopped standing there. I don't know where he is now. I hear bits and pieces. That he's working somewhere new. That he's telling people a new version of our story where he's less at fault. That he still complains about the money, about the ungrateful women who ruined his life. Maybe some people believe him. Maybe some don't. It doesn't really matter anymore. What matters is that my daughter and I are here. That there's a roof over our heads and food on our table and people in our lives who show up when they say they will. That when the porch light comes on at night, it's because I flipped the switch. That when someone knocks on my door now, my first thought is not, is this the police? Or is this a ghost? It is, did my friend drop by? Or is this a package I forgot I ordered? The fear is not all gone. I still jump when unknown numbers pop up on my phone. I still tense when I see a car that looks like the one he used to drive. I still have a folder in my emails with every legal document, every order, every confirmation, because a part of me is always ready to prove again what he did and what I survived. But I also have something else now. A quiet, boring, beautiful kind of stability that I used to think only other people got. Nights where the biggest drama is my daughter refusing to put her plate in the sink. Mornings where I drink my coffee while the sun comes up and no one is missing. Holidays where the only tension is whether my mother's side dish will turn out right. A future that feels like it belongs to us, not to his chaos. He can keep running from himself if he wants to. The system will keep catching up in small ways, nibbling at his paycheck, pulling him back into courtrooms, reminding him on paper of the lives he tried to abandon. That is between him and whatever conscience he has left. Me, I am done chasing ghosts. I live with the living now. I live with the people who answered when I called in the worst night of my life and kept answering over and over. Even when the story got messier and uglier and more complicated than any of us wanted. Rain still comes sometimes. Bad weather still crashes into my days when I least expect it. But I have learned how to close windows, how to roll up rugs, how to hold on until it passes. I have learned that I am allowed to lock my door, literally and metaphorically, even when someone on the other side is knocking and crying and telling me they've changed. I can love my daughter fiercely, respect my in-laws' grief, appreciate my parents' help, and still keep that lock firmly in place when it comes to him. That is not bitterness. That is survival. That is what it looks like when a woman finally realizes that she does not have to set herself on fire to keep a man warm, no matter how many stories he tells about the cold. And because life doesn't magically turn into a movie just because you survived something huge, the next part was not some dramatic new chapter. It was a lot of boring, hard work with little pockets of quiet drama sprinkled in. The kind no one posts about because it doesn't get many likes. There was the time a woman from my old community space cornered me in the cereal aisle and said, in that fake sweet voice, that she hoped I was enjoying the house his parents paid for. I could feel my blood rush to my face. For a second, I pictured myself unloading the whole story on her right there between the oatmeal and the pancake mix. Instead, I took a breath and said very calmly that their granddaughter's future was none of her concern. Then I picked up my cereal and walked away. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the box, but my daughter, who was with me, slipped her hand into mine and squeezed. Later that night, she told me she was proud of me for not yelling. I laughed because if she'd seen the speech inside my head, she would know how close it had been. There were nights when the loneliness felt heavy, when the house was quiet and the only sound was the dishwasher humming, and I would catch myself glancing at the empty chair across from me at the table. Not because I missed him exactly, but because my brain was still wired for another adult to be there. I started inviting my parents over more for dinner, or my friend from work, who loved to talk about her own messy ex. We would sit at my little table, eat pasta out of chipped bowls, and laugh until we cried about the things we had once thought were acceptable in relationships. There were school events, too. Those hit differently. Sitting in a crowded gym while kids sang off-key and held up construction paper art with glue strings still hanging off. I would scan the room automatically, some old part of my nervous system looking for his face, even though I knew he wasn't going to be there. My parents came. My in-laws came when they could. My daughter would wave at us from the risers, like we were her whole world. In those moments, for that half hour or whatever, the story was simple again, just a kid and her little cheering section. Then the school would send home forms for emergency contact updates, and there was again his blank line staring up at me. At first, I left it as father, with no number, like a placeholder for a ghost. Eventually, after one too many times of seeing staff squint at that empty space, I crossed it out and wrote, see grandparents. It felt like erasing something and correcting it at the same time. My in-laws carried their own quiet grief. My mother-in-law still kept a framed picture of him on a shelf. But over time, more pictures of our daughter crowded around it. Sometimes I would catch her looking at that old photo with tears in her eyes, and I knew she was mourning not just the man he had become, but the boy he used to be, the one I had never met. We never really talked about it directly. Instead, we traded practical kindnesses. I fixed things around their house that they couldn't reach. They dropped off soup when my daughter got sick. We held each other up without dissecting every feeling like we were in some kind of support group. Work slowly shifted from a place I drag myself to while my life burns down, to a place I go for a few hours a day where no one expects me to talk about my personal tragedy. A woman in my office who had once given me pity eyes started inviting me to lunch instead. Not to grill me about my situation, but to gossip about our boss and complain about the printer. That might not sound like much, but when your identity has been boiled down to the one with the missing husband, being treated like a whole person again feels like oxygen. I made small changes too. I switched the route I drove home so I didn't have to pass certain streets that punched me in the gut. I boxed up the last of his old shirts and gave them to a donation center a few towns over, so I wouldn't risk seeing some stranger wearing one at the gas station. I went through my social media accounts and quietly removed people who had piled on when he made his little victim posts. No dramatic callouts, no big speeches, just digital house cleaning. Click. Gone. Sanity saved. Every once in a while his name would pop up again. Someone would mention seeing him somewhere, or I would get a thin white envelope with some new update about payments or a minor court adjustment. The first few times my hands shook so hard I could barely open the mail. After a while, it became just another annoying piece of adult life like a bill. I would scan for anything important, file it in my growing folder, and move on. Not that I never spiraled. There were nights when I would lie awake, replaying everything and get angry all over again, even at people who had tried their best. I would think about the early days of our marriage before everything cracked and wonder where exactly the line was between normal relationship problems and the moment he started becoming the man who could drive away without a word. It's tempting to go back in your mind and try to find the first red flag, the one you could have cut down if you had been a little braver, a little less in love with the idea of your life. But here's what I landed on after way too many late-night overthinking sessions. I cannot go back and fix the younger me. I can only honor her by not throwing her under the bus now. She did the best she could with what she knew. I know more now. That's the point. So I started letting myself want things again. Nothing wild. I didn't suddenly decide to quit my job and move across the country or anything like that. It was smaller stuff at first. Taking a weekend class on something I liked, not something practical. Buying a candle that smelled nice without checking if it was on sale 3 times. Saying yes when a coworker invited me to a painting night, even though I was convinced my version would look like something a toddler did with their eyes closed. There was also the whole, will I ever date again? Question floating around like an annoying balloon I didn't ask for. People love asking that, by the way, as if romance is the final exam you have to pass after a breakup to prove you are truly healed. My answer for a long time was a very firm no. Not because I hated all men or anything dramatic like that, but because I genuinely didn't have the energy to share my closet, my couch, or my emotional bandwidth with anyone else. Over time, that no softened into more of a not right now. And also, if I ever do this again, he is going to have to clear a very high bar. I don't know if I will get there. If I do, it will be on my terms. There will be no secret second lives. No mysterious missing phones. No men who treat honesty like a favor they hand out when it's convenient. What I did commit to fully was being honest with my daughter in age-appropriate ways. As she grew, the questions changed. When she was little, it was, is Dad coming home? Later it turned into, did I do something wrong? Now it is more like, why do some people still believe his side of things when there's proof he's lying? That one is hard. I tell her truth doesn't always win the popularity contest at first. I tell her people cling to stories that make them feel comfortable, even when the facts poke holes in them. I tell her our job is to live in a way that we can sleep at night, not to win arguments with strangers. I also tell her that her father's choices are not a reflection of her value. Over and over. In different words, in different moments. When she fails a test, when a friend hurts her feelings, when she looks in the mirror and frowns at some new change in her growing body. I repeat it so often that sometimes I catch her saying a version of it to herself in the hallway mirror before school, and I have to step into the bathroom for a second so she doesn't see me tearing up. My parents shifted around me in quiet ways. My mother stopped talking to me, like I was about to fall apart. And one night at my kitchen table, she actually apologized. She admitted that at the beginning she had tried to excuse what he did, blaming stress or saying maybe I had been too hard on him, because the idea that he had simply chosen to walk away was too much to face. Hearing her say that loosened something in me. My father didn't make speeches, but he started treating me like an equal instead of a kid he had to rescue, bringing his toolbox over, eating at my table, telling me, in this calm way, that I was strong. My in-laws poured their love into our daughter instead of defending their son. They became the grandparents who sit on hard chairs in crowded rooms and clap the loudest. They send cards with a few dollars for her savings and notes that say, "For your future." They cannot undo what he did, but they are clearly on her side. From the outside, our life looks boring now. Most nights are homework on the table, dishes in the sink, my daughter arguing about bedtime. On weekends, we see family or stay home and watch a movie we already know by heart. No big drama, no calls to the police, no posts about me spreading like gossip. Just days where no one vanishes and no one turns our life into a spectacle. I still flinch when an unknown number pops up or when I see a car that looks like his. But the fear doesn't sit in my throat the way it used to. It passes. He can tell whatever version of the story he wants. I am done living in reaction to a man who walked away from his own child. So this is where I am now. In a small house with a kid who knows she is loved. With family who shows up. With a front porch light that I turn on myself before I lock the door at night. If he ever appears there again, I will not be the woman who drops her keys. I will be the one who keeps the lock between us and guards the life my daughter and I built out of the mess he left. For the first time in a long time, that feels like peace. Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand like that? Or had someone try to rewrite your story? I'd really love to hear what you think, or if you've been through anything similar. Let me know in the comments below.